In the final weeks of autumn in 1887, in a small and tightly bound settlement clinging to the edge of the northern frontier, a man named Elias Thorne quietly became the town's favorite joke. He was not born there. He had arrived alone, purchased a narrow, poorly sealed cabin, and inexplicably chosen to build it on the highest, most wind-scoured hill overlooking the valley. Elias was not unfriendly, but he was distant. He spoke little at the general store, offered no opinions about crop failures or market prices, and never joined the men at the tavern when they gathered to complain about the coming winter. While others talked, Elias worked, and what he worked on made absolutely no sense to anyone watching. Throughout October, as the valley prepared for the cold in the ways it always had, Elias did something that unsettled people. While every other family chopped, split, and stacked their firewood into neat, respectable piles a safe distance from their homes, Elias began constructing something that looked outright absurd. Around his cabin, he raised a heavy, clumsy wooden framework. It wasn't a fence. It wasn't a shed. It wasn't a barn. From a distance, it looked as if he were deliberately trying to bury his own house inside a second, uglier structure. Then he extended his roof outward on all sides, pushing it several feet beyond the original walls. The extension cast permanent shadow over the windows, swallowing daylight and making the cabin appear dark even at noon. Then came the firewood. Elias didn't stack it in piles. He stood it upright. Log by log, he packed oak and maple vertically from the ground all the way to the edge of the new roof. Every gap was filled, every space compressed. The wood formed a solid wall, thick and unbroken. To anyone passing by, it looked like Elias was sealing himself inside a wooden coffin. Wagons slowed as they passed. People laughed openly. Children pointed. Men shook their heads. The local carpenter, a proud man with strong opinions and louder confidence, made a point of mocking Elias in public. He told anyone who would listen that Elias was trapping moisture against his walls, suffocating the wood, guaranteeing rot. "Wood needs to breathe," the carpenter said with a grin. "He's building a box. He'll be begging for help when that roof collapses." Elias didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He didn't stop. Day after day he worked with a strange, relentless rhythm. Chop, lift, fit, stack. Each piece was placed carefully, like part of a puzzle. The walls grew thicker, nearly 2 feet deep, wrapping the north side, then the west, then every side of the cabin. From the road, his home vanished entirely, replaced by a towering block of firewood. Only a narrow, tunnel-like gap remained for the front door. By mid-November, the laughter faded into confusion. Why would a man work this hard to make his own home darker, uglier, and more enclosed? The townspeople felt a mix of pity and smug superiority. Their own wood piles sat neatly 20 or 30 feet from their homes, just as their fathers and grandfathers had done. Their windows remained clear, ready to watch the snowfall. Elias, they decided, had regressed. He looked less like a settler and more like an animal crawling into a burrow. One evening, a neighbor named Thomas rode up the hill to speak with him. Thomas was kind by nature, but he was convinced Elias was making a terrible mistake. "Elias," he called, his breath steaming in the cold air, "you're blocking the sun. It's going to be freezing in there. And when the snow comes, how are you going to reach your wood? You'll have to tear your own walls apart just to survive." Elias paused. He wiped the sweat from his face and looked at the sky, heavy and gray, pressing down on the valley like a warning. Then he looked back at Thomas. "The sun doesn't warm you when the wind never stops. And I won't be going out to get the wood. The wood is already with me." Thomas rode away shaking his head, retelling the exchange at the tavern that night. The men roared with laughter. They joked that Elias believed the firewood would walk into his house on its own. None of them noticed the barometer falling faster than anyone could remember. The winter of 1888 arrived without mercy. The skies turned a bruised, unnatural purple. Birds vanished days before the storm struck. The air grew heavy and wrong. History would later name it the Great White Hurricane. When it came, it did not creep in quietly. The wind screamed like a freight train tearing through the valley. The temperature didn't drop, it collapsed. Within hours, the mercury plunged to 40 degrees below zero. Snow blasted sideways, driven by winds so violent they stripped heat from flesh in seconds. Chickens froze solid before they reached their coops. For the town, the storm was catastrophic. The wind forced snow into every crack, every seam, every weakness. The exposed walls of traditional cabins failed immediately. Ice formed thick on the inside of windows. Heat vanished faster than stoves could replace it. Families fed their fires frantically, but it felt like trying to heat the outdoors. Then came the real terror, the firewood. Those proud stacks, placed safely away from the house, were now buried under 6 feet of compacted snow. To reach them, men tied ropes around their waists so they wouldn't vanish in their own yards. They clawed through drifts in zero visibility, their skin turning white with frostbite in seconds. Thomas lived that nightmare. Each trip outside nearly broke him. He dragged wet, frozen logs back inside, his hands shaking so violently he could barely strike a match. When the firewood finally burned, it hissed and smoked. Snow had soaked into the bark. Wet wood doesn't burn hot. It fills a room with smoke instead of warmth. Thomas sat in his freezing, smoke-filled home, his children shivering beneath blankets, wondering if morning would come. High above the valley, inside the wooden shell on the hill, life was very different. Elias Thorne sat calmly in his rocking chair, reading by lamplight. He wore no heavy coat. He wasn't shivering. The massive wall of firewood surrounding his cabin absorbed the wind's violence. The logs trapped dead air between the outer wall and the cabin itself, forming a perfect thermal barrier. Outside, the wind howled at 40 below zero. Inside, the heat stayed put. When his stove needed fuel, Elias didn't step into the blizzard. He opened his door and entered the narrow, sheltered tunnel beneath the extended roof. There, stacked neatly against his wall, was dry firewood, perfectly protected from snow and wind. He reached out, took a few logs, and stepped back inside. He didn't even put on his boots. As he burned the wood, he slowly dismantled his own insulation from the inside. It didn't matter. The outer layers still blocked the wind. He was consuming his fortress to survive. For 3 days the storm raged. Down below, roofs collapsed, furniture burned, floorboards vanished into stoves, people prayed. Many assumed Elias was already dead, frozen atop the hill in his strange wooden cave. When the wind finally died on the 4th morning, silence fell like a weight. The sun rose over a white frozen wasteland. Survivors tunneled out through second-story windows. Chimneys lay toppled. Faces were pale and hollow. A group of men, Thomas among them, gathered shovels and a sled. There was one place they dreaded visiting, the hill. They fought their way upward through waist-deep snow. When Elias's cabin came into view, they stopped cold. The structure was buried nearly to the roof, shaped by the wind into a massive drift. No smoke rose from the chimney. "The fire's out," Thomas whispered. "He's gone." They dug frantically at the entrance. The overhang had prevented the snow from packing tight against the door. Thomas pounded on the wood. "Elias! It's Thomas!" Silence. Then they heard a latch scrape. The door opened. Elias stood there holding a mug of steaming coffee. "Morning," he said calmly. "The storm's over." Inside, the stove glowed. The cabin was warm. Dry firewood waited by the door. No one laughed. Later, Elias explained simply, "Wood stops the wind. It holds heat, and when it's dry, it burns. I didn't fight the winter. I wore it. The carpenter came that afternoon. He touched the dry logs, felt the warmth, and removed his hat without a word. After that winter, the valley changed, and when Elias stacked his wood, no one laughed anymore. They picked up their axes and stacked theirs too.